The Summer of Screams tour, which will be hitting the road later this summer, has already revealed some pretty badass bands. Rocking this tour will be Powerman 5000, Psychostick, The Browning, and Kissing Candice, some of whom will be there from the first date to the very end of the journey, while others will be bringing their signature brand of ass-kicking on select dates. Today, we've got two more bands to add to the roster that fall under the latter category: Voodoo Terror Tribe, who will be playing August 17 to 30, and Earthcaller, who will join the tour August 31st and play through September 15th. You can follow Voodoo Terror Tribe on Facebook and Twitter, and Earthcaller can be found on Facebook and Twitter too. Make sure to follow Summer of Screams announcements via our tag, and also check out their socials to stay up to date: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We've been keeping close tabs on Agony since it was originally announced back in 2016, because it looks like it could be a horror experience like no other. As you no doubt know by now, the game takes place in Hell, and tasks you with tracking down the Red Goddess in a desperate attempt to escape eternal damnation. Developed by Madmind Studio and published by Playway with Maximum Games handling physical distribution, Agony had to be slightly censored on consoles in order to avoid the dreaded adults-only rating from the ESRB, so needless to say, this is definitely not a game for the faint of heart. Ahead of its release on PS4, Xbox One, and PC on May 29th, we decided to talk to Tomek Dutkiewicz, the head of Madmind Studios, about the process that went into creating such a twisted vision of Hell. We were also sure to ask him about the changes to the console versions that needed to be made to secure an M rating, and you'll probably be glad to know that the changes are minimal. Agony is available to pre-order on Amazon and Steam. Dread Central, is your version of Hell based purely on Christian mythology, or did you look to other sources as well? Tomek Dutkiewicz: definitely not, actually. Agony was supposed to be something unique and new from the very beginning. Basing the game on only one vision of Hell from a given religion would limit what I could show due to the limited range of my interpretation. To surprise players, I decided that the best solution would be to combine various ideas from different cultures and religions and then add my own influences, because this way I could keep players on their toes, not knowing what to expect until the very end of the game. DC, why did you opt for the game to be played from a first-person viewpoint? TD, I don't think it's a coincidence that many new horror games choose first-person perspective, FPP. The first Outlast proved that this viewpoint works well and strongly enhances immersion. I love the Silent Hill series, so I don't mind third-person perspectives. However, the choice of FPP for Agony seemed more natural when I started creating the game. The key element of the game is making sure the player is immersed in the game world in which they move, and the first-person perspective helps a lot to intensify that impression. DC, how will the player interact with the hellish environments? TD, players will have the opportunity to explore the game world by both playing as a martyr, and as a demon. Each of these characters have unique skills. For example, each of the demons controlled by the players has a specific type of attack, but their primitive nature does not allow them to solve puzzles. Those abilities are stronger utilizing the skills of the martyr. By using a torch to get away from spiders or snakes, and to burn away certain obstacles, the martyr has the ability to find additional passages, chambers, or other tormented souls with whom he can interact with. There are several types of puzzles in the game, and the world is filled with collectibles that reward the most persistent players. As players progress through the game, the story will continue to develop as they find notes, letters, pictures, figurines, or even a comic. DC, can you talk about the soundtrack? TD, the soundtrack in Agony is created by Draco Nerd, a talented Polish composer. Additionally, we were also able to work with the band Android Lust, who recorded the main theme for Agony, Shores Unknown, along with 2 additional songs. The game will also include one very atmospheric and unusual, compared to the rest of the soundtrack, song created thanks to the cooperation of Draco and Leanne Silva. DC, and the voice cast. TD, we were able to work with Karen Strassman, who is known for her role as Melina from Mortal Kombat X. She is a very talented actress, and her voice seems to fit perfectly as the main villain in Agony, the Red Goddess. DC, were you at all worried that Agony would be a difficult sell to mainstream audiences? TD, to be honest, I don't really care about the sales of the game. Agony is a project that was born in my head a long time ago, and I'm very happy and thankful that with the support of fans, we managed to make it real. This is a crazy and very unusual game, and its sales potential is difficult to estimate. Most important thing for me personally is that we've managed to complete Agony, despite many obstacles along the way. DC, can you talk about the changes that had to be made to the console version of Agony to avoid an adults-only rating from the ESRB? TD, sure. First of all, I'm glad that the rating agencies are not closed corporations that just make you cut out a given item by force. I spent a lot of time in contact with them to be sure that we censored only those things that we really had to. Thanks to this, we managed to leave most of the content intact. Censorship mainly affected 3 of the possible game endings. There are 7 endings, and a few smaller things that can be seen, unlocked only after the game has been completed once. Most players might not even notice. DC, Agony has amazing-looking graphics, despite being made on a somewhat limited budget, and some of your staff also worked on The Witcher 3, so would you say that indie AAA is the new norm? DC, I don't think so. We spent a lot of time to make Agony's graphics look good, but without a proper budget, no one is able to do graphics similar to a AAA-level title. DC, as impossible as it may seem, there are some people who actually believe hell is real. How do you think they will react to Agony? TD, I think they will take our vision of hell as something that naturally appeals to them. People have different ideas about hell, but it seems that Agony, thanks to the fact that it does not only focus on one religion, is able to affect the majority of people. It is a brutal world full of violence and vulgarity. I don't know how people who believe in hell will react to Agony, but I hope that no one will pour holy water on me when I travel home after work. Thanks for the interview. Anyone who grew up in the 1990s will have fond memories of watching Disney's Gargoyles. Clearly intended to rival Batman, the animated series, which was dominating ratings at the time, Gargoyles was noticeably darker than the usual Disney fare, making it a favorite among kids tired of having their entertainment sanitized, leading to it to last for an impressive 3 seasons. Although Gargoyles ended 21 years ago, it still retains a loyal and devoted fanbase, which probably explains why Funko have decided to release a line of Gargoyles-themed pops. Set to hit stores later this year, the Gargoyles line will feature both pops and keychains, and will include all your favorite characters from the show, including Goliath, Lexington, Broadway, Bronx, and Demona. In July, Funko will also release a double set of Gargoyles figures depicting the character frozen in stone, as they did throughout the day in the show. Images of the full set of Gargoyles figures are included in the gallery below, and they are also available to pre-order on Funko's website. And who knows, maybe if these sell well enough, Disney will realize that Gargoyles is still a hugely popular brand and give it the revival it clearly deserves. Last week, we began our conversation with lauded composer Bear McCreary, known for his work on shows like Battlestar Galactica and The Walking Dead, along with recent films The Cloverfield Paradox and Happy Death Day. Since Danny Elfman has been a constant source of influence and inspiration for Bear, and since the composer's birthday is coming up on May 29th, he's been a reoccurring theme throughout our conversation. In this concussion of our interview, we also discuss Bear's appreciation of horror and his thoughts regarding The Walking Dead's dwindling viewership, even as the show begins production on its 9th season. Danny Elfman, Dread Central. We've talked about how Danny Elfman's sound is instantly recognizable. It's circus-like, it's jaunty, it's whimsical. There's also a Bear McCreary sound. By comparison, it's atmospheric, it's moody, it's surreal. How would you describe the Bear McCreary sound, and what elements can listeners tune into in order to recognize your work without even seeing your name? Bear McCreary, that's a fascinating question, and I've got to say, Josh, I'm utterly unqualified to answer. You're more qualified than I am because I'm inside my brain. Even when I'm trying to reinvent myself, even when I'm trying to not sound like myself, I am myself. I make my version of whatever I'm doing. So I don't know. I will say, I certainly hope that there's no specific musical thing I can point to and say, well, you know, I always use the C minor chord in 4x4, you know what I mean. I'm striving to not be known for using a specific bag of tricks. But I think that what I strive to do, and what Danny Elfman very frequently does, is write music with personality. That is a word that has stuck with me for just about 20 years now. The first time I heard that word pertaining to music was when I was working with Elmer Bernstein, one of my other heroes. I was a protege of his for a few years. When I was just out of high school, I was sitting in on his film scoring class at USC, which I wasn't even allowed to attend. But I did the assignment, which was to score a scene from Set and Fear, one of the films Elmer scored back in, I think it was 1952. He gave it to the class and said, "Okay everybody, write a cue." So I wrote this cue and I remember thinking vividly, this feels like a Danny Elfman cue. It had big tribal drums and low woodwinds. It reminded me of Nightbreed, one of my favorite Danny Elfman scores. And, of course, looking back on it, it was way too big and aggressive. It was steamrolling over this black and white scene from the 1950s. Elmer smiled and he said, "This cue has a lot of personality." And I remember realizing I wasn't thinking about it that way. I was just trying to make the most awesome thing I could. And as I've gotten into this business, as I've written music and listened to music that's out there, I've realized, music with personality is consistently the music I enjoy. It's the music that stands out to me. And I really picked that up from Danny Elfman. His music has so much personality we immediately identify it with him. But even his scores that don't immediately jump out as being a Danny Elfman score still have personality, and that's an incredibly valuable thing. DC, you've built a very diverse body of work, including scoring horror for The Walking Dead and dark sci-fi for the last 2 Cloverfield movies. How does it compare to other genres, and what do you like best about scoring horror? BM, I have a blast with horror films. To me, horror isn't even a genre, it's a medium. Like, The Cloverfield Paradox is this epic science fiction body horror psychological thriller, and Happy Death Day is like a charming comedy, but they're both horror films. And they allow me to explore completely different moods and textures. I think one of the things I love most about horror films is they really lean on music, perhaps more than other genres, to really help pull in the audience. It doesn't just mean the music is bigger and louder all the time, it's actually quite the opposite. The music needs to be expertly delivered, so when it is big and bombastic you can really scare people, which is the hardest thing to do and one of the things I love the most. I grew up on horror movies and I think horror audiences are massively sophisticated. When people go to see a comedy, even if they've already seen thousands of them, they're still going to laugh, if it's funny. Horror audiences like me, when you've seen 1,000 horror movies, you have to work hard to scare me. I know all the tricks, I know all the cliches, I know where the plot is going, which is why it can be fun for me, because it's a challenge. That's why I think movies like Get Out and, in its own way, Happy Death Day are so effective. Because even if you've seen a million horror films, you're still disarmed by something in those films that's new. And music can really be a big part of that, and it's an absolute thrill for me. DC, complete this sentence, a movie I wish they'd remake so I could do the score the new version would be. BM, The Great Escape. DC, let's dish about The Walking Dead. Of course, we know you have nothing to do with the decision-making involved in producing the show, but as someone with a stake in it, I think your insights will be interesting. Cool? BM, totally cool. DC, are you a fan of the comic books? BM, yes. DC, how would you explain the show's dwindling viewership? BM, as a fan of the show, I think there's a natural exhaustion that kicks in when you go beyond season 3 of anything. I mean, name me a show where season 8 had the highest ratings. I wonder if there's even an example in the history of television where that's the case. So, I look at it differently. I'm like, hey, this show is in season 8 and look at how many people watching it. Think of all the shows that never made it this far. Buffy never got there. I don't remember if The Next Generation got there, but whatever. My point is, it's a juggernaut that's lasted a long time and it's continuing strong with its core demographic. Personally, I think that since the time that the comics were written in and the era that we exist in now, the politics and national conversation has changed to the degree that it's altered what makes The Walking Dead appealing to a lot of people. The escapist fantasy has changed. It posed the question, can you imagine if our country was a devastated hellscape? In the early 2000s until 2016, that was really an escapist fantasy. It was a fun world. I love I Am Legend. I love these kinds of stories. DC, the idea of starting over from scratch. BM, exactly. But I think the ratings started to go down around the time of the election, around the time of the campaign. And I think there was really a sense of unease, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. Things are just a little less known, and things that we all took for granted suddenly we're thinking about. And then you turn on your TV and you see Negan. Now, 5 years ago when I first met this guy in the comic, I loved him because he represented this escapist fantasy. I really think that some of the viewership that has left The Walking Dead might be because, nationally, we're more scared than we were. And it's not as much fun to turn on the TV every Sunday and get that kind of hyper-violence. DC, you're saying it's hitting too close to home these days? BM, exactly. You can weave politics and satire more into fantasy and sci-fi, but there needs to be a sense of detachment. As a contrary example, we did an arch on Battlestar Galactica that was, in my estimation, a very thinly veiled allegory for the war in Iraq. It had our heroes strapping themselves in with suicide bombs, going in to blow up a police station of the occupying force. And the audience was like, yeah, go do that. It really had a lot to say about what was happening, but it was buried under the surface enough that people just enjoyed it as a science fiction show. Not to mention, for most Americans, the war in Iraq is far away. So The Walking Dead hits closer to home literally and geographically. So, I don't know, but I do wonder if that has something to do with it. DC, I never thought about it like that, and I think our readers will find your input illuminating. If you've still got a couple minutes, we'd love to hear about what you're working on next. BM, I'm very excited about God of War, for Sony PlayStation. I don't do video games very often, but this one is just epic and I think it's going to be fantastic. And I have a number of horror and science fiction films around the corner, but it's a little early to say what they are just yet. There's a lot of cool stuff coming up in the next year, so I'd just say stay tuned. And please include, from me, a hearty happy birthday to Danny Elfman and thanks for all the years of inspiration.